now you have the basic story about money in the economy, how that affects inflation, unemployment, and now you've watched this video on central bank independence. And again, as you saw in the video, and you also saw in the podcast that you listened to, governments have an incentive to get involved with the economy because politicians want votes. So let's talk about this for a second. What do the politicians want the central bank to do? So maybe the way we start by talking about this is, how do you actually get to be in charge of the central bank? Here's the dude in charge of the central bank, Federal Reserve Chairman. The president nominates them, and the Congress basically agrees or disagrees with it and appoints them that way. Now what happens if Trump wants this guy out? Well, too bad. It's like a justice. Once they're appointed for a term of office, and it doesn't matter if you like what they're doing and not like what they're doing. This is called central bank independence. Because, and here's the reason why. If Donald Trump got to put somebody in charge, or Barack Obama, or whoever got to put someone in charge, and then every time they didn't like what they were doing, take them out again, the central bank would be at the whim of whatever the politicians want. And what do the politicians want the central bank to do? Politicians, let's just start right here. Politicians want votes, especially in an election year. Politicians really, really care about votes. So say Donald Trump in 2020, he's going to be running for office this year. He would love for the economy to just humming along. Everybody's super happy, because if they're happy with the economy, they are going to be happy with him. What do voters want? Voters want jobs, economic security. So as we've already talked about, if I'm the central bank and I increase the interest rates, I'm going to put more money in the economy, which is going to increase economic growth. It's going to reduce unemployment. These are all wonderful things if I am the person running for office. So if Donald Trump was in charge of the money policy, the monetary policy, he would, every election year, charge it up. Same thing with Barack Obama, same thing at every president. They would make sure that the interest rates are low so that the unemployment is low and the economic growth is high. They always have an incentive to lower interest rates, especially right before an election. Okay, so now here's what this is setting up. This means that politicians aren't trying to find the right balance between inflation, deflation, hyperinflation, depression. They're really trying to get elected. They end up making pretty bad monetary policy. The short term is, I want to get reelected, and they will lean towards that rather than the long term of protecting the economy of the country. So now let's just talk about what this is going to mean, like if the politicians were in charge. So at the very least, we would have a tendency toward economic growth, low interest rates, and probably a tendency toward inflation. This is a problem. But if we even look at this even more, let's just make a little graph right here. Here's 2016, here's 2020, here's 2024, all these election years. So what we'd expect is interest rates would be low as we approach that, and then maybe after the election they kind of go back up again, and then they go back down again, and then they go back up again, and they go back down. But it's all based on that. Now, essentially what you're going to have is you're going to have the money, the value of money, the amount of money in the system is going to bounce around a little bit like this. Now, let's say that you are a foreign investor from outside of America. And by the way, again, this is true for every country. This is not just an American thing. We're just leaning on that right now. But let's say you're like a Saudi, billionaire, and you want to invest your money in America. Do you want to invest your money in America? The answer is probably not, because the money that you send in there is going to be bouncing around. The value of it's going to be bouncing around so much based on the whims of the politicians rather than on good monetary policy. So I'd rather take my money, or what we're going to call FDI, foreign direct investment. I'd rather take my foreign direct investment, my money coming from outside the country, I'd rather put that into a country where the monetary policy is more stable, where they're doing things to control the value of the money, because then I'm going to get more of my money back. So this becomes the problem is, yes, on the one hand, you can pump more money into the economy and you can basically charge economic growth that way. but you aren't going to get the investment from the outside, which is going to harm your economy over the long term. Which takes us to this: central bank independence. So what countries have determined, and what they've sort of discovered over time, is that what you want to do is make sure the politicians don't have their hands on how much money is being put into the system as much as you can. Central bank independence. The central bank is independent from the politicians that are in power at that moment. And so if we look at this, the central bank chairman is not a politician. They're essentially hired. They're not elected. They're selected rather than elected. But how do they get fired? They can't be fired by the voters. They can't be fired by the leaders. They're essentially in there for a term of office. And what that allows the bank to do is to take a long-term view of the economy and to find that better balance and not be sort of swayed by the political motives of the moment or the need of the president to get reelected or whatever. And so if you look at this graph over here, just to sort of demonstrate this, here we have a bunch of different countries, and they're on this graph. So on this side, on the bottom here, we have index of central bank independence. The more over here, the more independent institutionally, how they're sort of set up, the more independent the central bank is from the politics of the country. Over here, we have the average inflation rate. And remember, if politicians are in charge, we would expect the inflation rate to be high because they always have an incentive to lower the interest rates. And that's actually exactly what we see. So take New Zealand here. New Zealand has a relatively low central bank independence, meaning the central bank is not very independent from the politicians, and the inflation rate is relatively high, not a big surprise. And so as we look at these other sort of countries on here and how they're sort of ranked on that, what we see is there actually is a relationship between central bank independence and the absence of inflation. That's essentially what we mean when we say good monetary policy. It's not too much inflation, it's not too much deflation. It's sort of right in that sort of sweet spot there. You kind of want a sweet spot. You want a little bit of inflation, but you don't want a lot of inflation. That sort of sweet spot right there. All right, that's it. I'm going to have you guys, so now that you have these tools, what I want you to do is I want you to watch this next little video, and then I want you to answer the question about what you think the government should do to help restart the economy during and after the coronavirus. Now you've got a good idea about what's going on. How then do we come back from this coronavirus mass unemployment? What would you recommend, just based on what you've been looking at here? What would we want to avoid? That's it. Thanks.